Picture this. Britain is starving, ships are sinking faster than they can be replaced. And the most dangerous enemy in the Atlantic is winning. Now imagine the solution does not come from admirals or seasoned captains, or decades of naval experience. It comes from a 19-year-old girl holding a piece of chalk. Tonight is the story of how teenage girls with stopwatches and a painted floor outthought Nazi submarines, outmaneuvered the Royal Navy's own doctrine, and quietly won the Battle of the Atlantic while history almost erased them. January 23, 1942, Liverpool, England. Inside a requisitioned building, a 19-year-old named Janet O'Keel stands staring at a floor painted with a grid. Each square represents 1 nautical mile of the Atlantic Ocean. She holds a piece of white chalk. Around her, senior naval officers with decades of experience at sea watch with open skepticism. In a few moments, they are about to discover that a teenage girl with no naval background understands submarine warfare better than they do. Captain Gilbert Roberts straightens his collar, fully aware of what is about to unfold. He is 41 years old, invalided ashore 4 years earlier with tuberculosis. He has been placed in charge of what many admirals quietly consider a desperate joke, the Western Approach's tactical unit. A wargaming center where, as critics sneer, children play with chalk while Britain slowly starves. But Roberts has seen something his superiors refuse to acknowledge. In March 1941, 41 merchant ships were sunk. In June, 61. In November, 13 ships vanished from a single convoy. The numbers are unmistakable. Everything the Royal Navy believes about how to fight submarines is wrong. What Janet O'Keel does not yet know, what none of the teenage girls gathering in this room know, is that within 16 months they will develop the tactics that turn the Battle of the Atlantic. Admirals will begin traveling to Liverpool specifically to be defeated by them in simulated combat. And by May 1943, the chalk marks they draw on a linoleum floor will force Grand Admiral Carl Dönitz to withdraw his entire U-boat fleet in defeat. The only thing that really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. Winston Churchill will later write. What he will not write is that teenage girls with stopwatches prevented Britain from starving. To understand why the Royal Navy needed saving from itself, you have to understand what was happening in the North Atlantic in early 1942. German U-boats were not fighting the way British admirals expected. They were not attacking submerged during daylight with periscopes raised. They were doing something doctrine said was impossible. They were slipping into convoys at night, on the surface, approaching from behind, threading themselves between columns of merchant ships like wolves among sheep. They fired torpedoes at point-blank range, then vanished beneath the chaos before escorts could react. By the time defenders realized what was happening, 2 or 3 ships were already burning. The Wolfpack tactic was devastatingly effective. U-boats operated in groups of 8 to 20, coordinated by radio from Dönitz's headquarters in France. One submarine would locate a convoy and report its position. Others would race ahead of its projected route. Then, after dark, they would attack simultaneously from multiple directions. British convoy doctrine was built on World War I assumptions, lone submarines attacking in daylight. Escorts were trained to counter that threat. Not this one. In January 1942, the Royal Navy had no coherent response to Wolfpacks. Senior officers expected captains to rely on experience, issue orders, wait for acknowledgements, and coordinate responses. By the time that process concluded, the U-boats were gone and more ships were sinking. Lieutenant Commander Peter Gretton, who survived multiple Wolfpack attacks, later wrote a devastating assessment. Our doctrine assumed we would have time to think. The Germans gave us seconds to act. Men died while we waited for permission to fight back. Captain Roberts understood the problem because he had watched the Navy ignore it for years. Invalided ashore in 1938, he observed as admirals prepared for the wrong war. More ships were built, sonar improved, sailors trained. But the underlying assumptions about submarine warfare went unquestioned. Roberts proposed something radical: systematic tactical analysis through wargaming. Not abstract discussions in conference rooms, but live simulations under time pressure, with incomplete information, where officers made decisions and immediately saw the consequences calculated using naval tables and mathematics. The Admiralty gave him a building, a modest budget, and permission to try. What they did not give him were experienced officers to run the games. Everyone qualified was at sea. Roberts needed people who could calculate intercept courses, track multiple moving targets, measure sonar ranges, and do it all quickly. He turned to the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens. Janet O'Keel arrived at Duatu in January 1942, 19 years old. Her father was a prominent Liverpool businessman. She was educated, privileged, and utterly unprepared for what Roberts asked her to do: command submarines in simulated combat against senior officers. Jane Laidlaw came from Scotland with a background in chartered accountancy. Her mathematical precision was paired with a sharp sense of humor. She would later name the unit's first major breakthrough Raspberry, as in blowing a raspberry at Hitler. The humor masked deadly serious calculation. Laura Janet Howes, known as Bobby, was born in Antigua, a mathematical prodigy whose calculations determined whether simulated escorts detected lurking U-boats or died in ambush. Mary Wales was selected for her grasp of team tactics learned playing hockey. June Duncan, who would later become a fashion model, spent 1942 calculating intercept angles and depth charge patterns. The system Roberts built was deliberately unforgiving. A floor painted with a grid. Players separated behind canvas screens with peepholes, unable to see the full picture. Just like real commanders scanning dark seas through binoculars, wrens armed with colored chalk acted as fate itself. Green marks for unseen U-boat movements. White marks for escorts. Every 2 minutes the clock advanced, no pauses, no rewinds. A bad decision erased a chalk merchant ship, and with it, food, fuel and ammunition Britain desperately needed. Officers accustomed to deliberation had 120 seconds to act. The wrens calculated sonar detection ranges based on water temperature, torpedo run times based on speed and bearing, illumination patterns based on wind and cloud cover. The Navy had neglected this kind of tactical study for 20 years. Now survival depended on learning it at emergency speed. The first simulations revealed a terrifying truth. Every doctrine the Navy taught made things worse. Standard procedure after a torpedo strike was for the senior escort officer to assess the situation, issue detailed orders, and coordinate a response. That process took 8 to 12 minutes. In that time, U-boats firing from multiple bearings could sink several more ships and escape. The wrens playing U-boat commanders discovered this not through training, but through logic. They studied German manuals and asked a simple question: how would we attack? Then they tested those ideas against British doctrine, and won repeatedly. From February through March 1942, simulated convoys were destroyed faster than real ones. British escort doctrine was fundamentally broken. Jean Laidlaw devised the breakthrough: raspberry. Upon a torpedo strike, the attacked ship fired 2 white rockets and transmitted a single word. Every escort immediately rushed to the convoy perimeter, flooding the darkness with star shells. Any escort could initiate. No permission, no hierarchy. The innovation wasn't equipment. It was authority. When tested, response time dropped from 8 minutes to 90 seconds. U-boats were caught on the surface, illuminated mid-attack, forced to dive early. Escorts arrived while submarines were still descending, sonar locked, depth charges ready. Raspberry was scheduled for official release in May 1943. It was cancelled because by then it had already worked so well the Germans had abandoned the tactic. Success outran paperwork. Before GIT could be shut down, one final test remained. In November 1942, Admiral Max Horton became commander of Western Approaches. A World War I submarine ace with no tolerance for nonsense, he could have ended Bu-8U instantly. Instead he visited Liverpool. Janet O'Keel and Jean Laidlaw were assigned to demonstrate beta search, playing U-boat commanders hunting a convoy. Horton personally commanded the escorts. By mid-May, the teenagers had sunk him 5 times. They identified his patterns, anticipated his moves, and punished every mistake. Horton stood up, looked at Roberts and said, "This works." When told 200 officers had been trained, he replied, "Not enough. I want every escort commander through here." 50 a week, Horton became NITU's fiercest defender. After the war, he said Roberts and his team contributed materially to Germany's defeat. His predecessor was even clearer. Without winning the Atlantic, the war would have been lost. From 1940 to 1945, to train 5,000 officers from across the Allied world. The training was humbling. Men hardened by combat were outmaneuvered by teenagers with chalk. The lesson mattered. Speed mattered. Rigid doctrine killed. March 1943 was the nadir. Nearly 20 ships. Britain had 3 months of food left. Plans for negotiated peace began then. May 1943 arrived. 41 U-boats destroyed. 13 merchant ships lost. Dönitz withdrew his fleet. Technology helped, aircraft, radar, sonar, but tactics made them effective. And those tactics came from Liverpool. Bu-8U developed pineapple, banana, beta search, step aside each stress, tested, refined and fed back from real combat. German commanders reported Allied escorts responding impossibly fast. The Wolfpack advantage vanished. After the war, Bu-8U disappeared into obscurity. The women returned to civilian life. Their work stayed classified. History favored hardware over human insight. Decades later, records survived. Voices mostly did not. The lesson is larger than war. Every breakthrough followed the same path: rejection, accuracy, validation, rapid scaling, historical erasure. Institutions resist innovation by design. In 1942, Britain survived because it listened, briefly, to people it dismissed. 80 years later, most institutions still wouldn't. The question remains: what impossible problems could be solved today if we stopped assuming the experts already know the answers?